Hey everybody, this is Kelly of Rojo Chief Clothing, and as you see right here, this is my Instagram, and I'm going to click on my link tree. That's going to send you to all of my links: Anchor.fm, the YouTube channel that you already know about, my online clothing store, and my Facebook page, so you can follow me. Alright, so Anchor.fm, that's my podcast. So stories or news that I'm not going to post on YouTube, you can find them on my podcast, and you can listen to them on Spotify and also on Breaker and other, podcasts. Okay. Then, as you may or may not know, this is my online clothing store where you can find fashions on here for men, women, kids, and babies. So, let's get ready for the show. Hey everybody, this is Kelly of Rojo Chief Clothing, and I'm here to talk to you about the ancient Egyptians and their connections to the Mayas, okay, and to the Americas. So it says author Augustus Le Plougin, Augustus Henry Julian Le Plougin, was a British-American archaeologist and photographer who studied the pre-Columbian ruins of America, particularly those of the Maya civilization on another northern Yucatan Peninsula. Okay, so this book is called Queen Mu and the Egyptian Sphinx by Augustus Le Plougin. Sacred Mysteries Among the Mayas and the Quiches. The sketch of the ancient inhabitants of Peru and their civilization, etc., etc., etc. New York, published 1900. London, England. Okay, so this is the preface of Queen Mu and the Egyptian Sphinx. It says, forget that all leading geologists now agree in the opinion that America is the oldest known continent on the face of the planet. That the fossil remains of human beings found in various parts of it, far distant from each other, prove that man lived there in times immemorial, and that we have not the slightest ray of light to illuminate the darkness that surrounds the origin of these primeval men. Therefore, it is now admitted by the generality of scientists that man, far from descending from a single pair, located in a particular portion of the Earth's surface, has appeared on every part of it where the biological conditions have been propitious to his development and maintenance, and that the production of the various species, with their distinct, well-marked anatomical and intellectual characteristics, was due to the difference of those biological conditions and to the general forces calling forth animal life prevalent in the places where each particular species had appeared, and whose distinctive marks were adapted to the particular environment. The Maya sages doubtless had reached similar conclusions, since they called their country Mayach, that is, the land of the first emerged from the bosom of the deep, the country of the shoot, and the Egyptians, according to Herodotus, boasted that their ancestors in the lands of the West were the oldest men on earth. Now we're going to pause right there. Now, you have the Egyptians, according to Herodotus, which I believe was a Greek philosopher. Now, the Greeks, they were around at the same time as ancient Egyptians, and they were students of the ancient Egyptians. And the ancient Egyptians taught the Greeks a lot. And as we already know, that the ancient Egyptian civilization fell because the Romans came in eventually and destroyed a lot of the information that was there and stole whatever they could from ancient Egypt. However, I would look at this as a primary source, since the Greeks had lived in the same time period as the ancient Egyptians. And it says that the opinion of Liel, Humphrey, and most of the modern geologists regarding the priority of Americas iniquity, meaning how old it is. It says, be correct. What right have we to gainsay the assertion of the Mayas and the Egyptians claiming likewise priority for their people and their country? It is but natural to suppose that intelligence in man was developed on the oldest continent, among its most ancient inhabitants, and that the Kemetic civilization grew apace with its development. When, at the impulse of instinct, self-preservation, men linked themselves into clans, tribes, and nations, history was born, and with it is a desire to commemorate the events of which it is composed. The art of drawing, or writing, was then invented. The incidents regarding as the most worthy of being remembered and preserved for the knowledge of coming generations were carved into the most enduring material of their possession, stone. And so it is what we find today, the cosmogonic and religious notions, the records of natural phenomena, predominant incidents in the history of their nation and of their rulers sculptured on the walls of the temples of palaces of the civilized Mayas, the Chaldeans, and the Egyptians, as on the sacred rock and in the hallowed caves of primitive uncivilized man. It is the monumental inscription into the books of the Mayas that we must learn if we wish to learn about the primeval traditions of mankind and the development of civilization and the events that took place centuries before the dim myths are recorded as occurrences at the beginning of our written history. Historians, when writing on the universal history of the race, have never taken into consideration that of man in America and the role that the remote ages American nations played on the world stage and the influence they exerted over the populations of Asia, Africa, and Europe. So here he's basically saying that ancient America, and particularly speaking of the Mayans, that they had a huge impact and influence over the nations in Asia, Africa, and Europe. It says still, as far as we can scan the long vista of the past centuries, the Mayas seem to have direct and intimate communications with them. This fact is indeed no new revelation, as proved by the universality of the name Maya, which seemed to have been as well known by all civilized nations thousands of years ago, as is today that of the English. Thus, we meet with it in Japan, in the Isles of the Pacific, Hindustan, which we know is India today, Asia Minor, Egypt, Greece, and Equatorial Africa, North and South America, as well as the countries known to us as Central America, which is those composed of the Maya Empire. The existence of the Western continent was no more of a mystery to the inhabitants of the countries bordering on the Mediterranean than those whose shores are bathed by the waves of the Indian Ocean. Okay, so I'm skipping down, and it says in the classic authors, Greek and Latin, we find frequent mention of the great Saturnian continent, distant many thousands of stadia from the pillars of Hercules towards the setting of the sun, Plutarch, in the life of Solon, says that when the famed Greek legislator visited Egypt 600 years before the Christian era, Sonchis, a priest of Sais, also Xenophius, the priest of Heliopolis, told him that 9,000 years since, the relations of the Egyptians with the inhabitants of the lands of the West had been interrupted because of the mud that had been made the sea impassable after the destruction of Atlantis by earthquakes. Okay, so I'm skipping down to where it says that the Western continent was visited by the Carthaginians a few years before, indicting of Plato, which is another Greek philosopher, Atlantis. The portraits of men with long beards of Phoenician features discovered by me in 1875, sculptured by the columns and ante of the castle of Chichen. Bear witness. Now we know Chichen, that is in Mexico. It says, Diodorus Siculus attributes the discovery of the western continent to the Phoenicians and describes it as a country where the landscape is varied by very lofty mountains and the temperature is always soft and equitable. Okay, it says, fleeing from the wrath of her brother, Ak, Queen Mu directed her course towards the rising sun in the hope of finding shelter in some of the remnants of the land of Mu, as Azores, for instance, failing to fall in such a place of refuge as she was seeking. She continued her journey eastward until at last reached the Maya colonies that for many years had been established on the banks of the Nile. The settlers received her with open arms, called her the little sister Isis, and proclaimed her their queen. Before leaving her mother country in the west, she had caused to be erected not only a memorial hall to the memory of her brother husband, but also the superb mausoleum in which were placed his remains and statue representing him. On the top of the monument was his totem, a dying leopard with a human head, a veritable Sphinx, once established in the land of her adoption. Did she order the erection of another of his totems, again a leopard with a human head, to preserve his memory among her followers? The names inscribed on the base of the Egyptian Sphinx seem to suggest the conjecture. Through the ages, the Egyptian Sphinx had been the enigma of history. Has its solution at least been given by the ancient Maya archive? In the appendix are presented for the first time the modern ages cosmogonic notions that the ancient Mayas rediscovered by me. They will be found identical with those of the other civilized nations of antiquity. In them are embodied many of the sacred doctrines communicated in their initiations and adepts. Let's go over that again. So that's your Freemasonry, your ancient Freemasonry with these ancient cultures, okay? Let's go over that again. So it says civilized nations of antiquity, meaning ancient nations. In them are embodied many of the secret doctrines, that's Masonry, communicated in their initiations and adepts of India, Chaldea, Egypt, and Samothrace, the origin of worship of the cross and that of the tree and the serpent, introduced in India by the Nagas, who raised such a magnificent temple in Cambodia, in the city of Angkor Thom, and to their god, the seven-headed serpent, Ak Chapat of the Mayas. Please like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, so you can know when I drop a new video.